Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, horror, I've got 10 fantastic horror books for you, each of which you could read in a weekend. So sometimes I think it's fantastic to be able to pick up a book on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning and know that you will have finished it by the time the weekend is out. So I wanted to give you here recommendations for shorter works of horror, all of which I think are fantastic and all of which I'm confident you could read in a weekend. Now, some of them are longer than others. Some of them are very short and you could definitely read in a weekend. Some of them are a little bit longer and might challenge you a little bit, but I think anyone with a reasonably free weekend could get through any of these books. So this is not going to be a long video. I'm going to rattle through them. I'll leave a list of all of them in the description. But if you've got any questions about any of them, do just ask in the comments and I will endeavour to answer as soon as I can. So let's get on with the 10. So these are in no particular order. So the first one is Below by Laurel Hightower, which is a fantastic kind of creature feature type book about Mothman. So tracks a young woman who's travelling across the country, travelling through, I think, West Virginia, gets involved in a traffic accident and weird stuff starts happening thereafter. Really gripping, really suspenseful, quite scary at times. Thoroughly recommended. I had a great time with this book. Next up is a classic, Psycho by Robert Bloch. So I read this in like a couple of hours. It's quite short and it's incredibly gripping. You'll know the story from the movie, but even if you've seen the movie, this is worth reading because it casts a bit of a different light on Norman Bates. You see a lot of his kind of internal monologue within this story. So a fantastic read, definitely worth your time. Next up, we have a manga collection, Shiver by Junji Ito. So it's manga, so it's pretty quick to read, even though this is I think getting on for 400 pages long. A really great collection of short stories, all very different from each other. It's mostly, as you'd expect from Junji Ito, really weird, but some of them are quite kind of wistful and moving as well. Some of them are just plain disgusting, but he's got a fantastic art style, a fantastic imagination, and if you've never read any of his stuff, this is a great kind of introduction to his work and his style. Next, another older book, so this time I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. So this has been filmed a few times with varying degrees of success, most recently with Will Smith. But it's a fantastically gripping novel about the last man alive trying to survive in a world populated by vampires. Really chilling, really gripping, like really, really suspenseful. And it's got one of my favourite endings to any book ever written. Absolutely fantastic. Next, we have another work of graphic art. So this time, Through the Woods by the author Emily Carroll. So this is a wonderfully inventive and visually beautiful graphic novel that retells a bunch of old kind of fairy tales and stories from folklore in a really effective way. Parts of it are genuinely really creepy and chilling, but the artwork is just fantastic throughout. So again, because it's a graphic novel, quite quick to read, but it will linger with you, trust me. Next one that I've talked about on the channel fairly recently, the shortest thing I'm going to talk about today. So a short story, The Yellow Wallpaper by Perkins Gilman. So written, I forget when it was written now, in the 1800s, I think. A really, really effective story about a woman who's effectively imprisoned by her husband in this room because she's recuperating. But really, it's a reflection on Charlotte Perkins Gilman's own experiences of postpartum psychosis. So one of those horror stories where you never really know if what you're reading is actually happening or if it's in the mind of the narrator. Really incredibly chilling, and a fascinating book as well, that in terms of its analysis and reflection on what it's like to go through something like postpartum psychosis, which at the time the book was written wasn't even something that was really recognised by the medical profession. Next up, something a bit more fun, Horrorstor by Grady Hendrix. So Grady Hendrix is a really entertaining writer. I've enjoyed all of the books I've read by him. I've chosen this one because it's one of his shorter ones, and it's really fun because of the way it's told. So it's a kind of haunted house story, effectively, but set in basically an IKEA store. It's not called IKEA in the book, but it's like IKEA. With some of the staff like working overnight and discovering all sorts of weird goings on. What makes the book such a delight, particularly if you read it in its physical form, is that it looks like an IKEA catalogue. And as you get the kind of sections between the chapters and things like that, you get like made up pieces of furniture that Grady Hendrix has come up with and things like that, but all of which have some kind of relation to the story. So just a really, really fun read, and an interesting one to leave out on the coffee table and see if people pick up and comment on. Next, another one I've talked about on the channel fairly recently. This is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. So a short horror novel, really effective. So a retelling of the Fall of the House of Usher, but with a really interesting lens. So set in a kind of an imaginary European state. The central character, the narrator, is non-binary, and there's really interesting reflection on the kind of role of pronouns in language and things like that. So the society these characters live in have multiple different pronouns, and that's explored quite interestingly in the book. But that kind of analysis never bogs down the story, which at its heart is a really wonderfully creepy tale that's really effective, with a kind of gradually building suspense and horror as it progresses. I absolutely love this book. Two more to go then. So the next one is another older one, so from the 60s, Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. So you may well be familiar with the Roman Polanski movie. The book that movie was based on is every bit as good. So a really fantastically suspenseful and creepy story about this young woman going through weird stuff during her pregnancy. It's just a really fun read. Levin is such a good writer of just kind of popular suspenseful fiction. I've never had a bad time with one of his books. And then finally, and this is the one that's a bit longer, so this I think is over 300 pages, but it's such a good book. I'm pretty confident that once you start reading it, you won't be able to stop, and you will therefore finish it in the weekend. We'll see. Someone will have to try and see if I'm lying or not. So the book is Thor by an author called Wayne Smith. This is a fantastically lovely horror novel. It's one of the warmest and most charming horror novels I've ever read, and the reason it's so warm and charming is the central character is a dog. So the central character is this dog called Thor, who's very protective of the family he lives with, and when he perceives that family is under threat, he has to kind of battle between the two sides of his personality. The one side that wants to protect his pack, and the other side that knows he needs to obey the rules that are laid down by the family. And the family don't perceive the threat that Thor, thinks is coming for them. And so there's this constant battle, and that battle is so beautifully played out. I've never known an animal character to be as well presented as in a book as Thor is in this book. And the book is a complete delight as a result. It is incredibly suspenseful, though. You really don't know how it's going to turn out. And if you're a dog lover, I cannot recommend this book enough. It's just brilliant. So there you go, 10 short horror books, any of which I think you could finish in a weekend. If you're willing to take up that challenge, do let me know how you get on. Let me know if you've got any recommendations of your own as well. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.